and think they came to the wrong spot.
To hops, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're going to be getting started here in just a minute. As you're trickling in, feel free to pop into the chat where you're joining us from. We've seen that we've got registrants from all over. I know that I personally am from South Carolina. We have Alexandra joining us from Virginia. Cindy is joining us from Washington, D.C. We'd love to see where you're from, so feel free to pop that in the chat. And like I said, we'll be getting started here in just a moment. Ventura, California. Can't imagine why. Could it possibly be because we're talking about Ventura Botanical Gardens here in just a little bit? Very exciting. I know there's some watch parties going on in Ventura, so that's exciting. Betsy coming to us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We've got some Austin, Texas representation going on. Los Angeles. Right now, California is definitely in the house. Richmond, California. Man, California brought the game tonight. Or I guess this afternoon, really. Sorry, California. Louisville, Kentucky. Gail, we got to hear from a garden, Waterfront Botanic Gardens out of Louisville yesterday. And that was fantastic. So hope you've had the chance to visit, or perhaps you work there. Hope I pronounced it right. We got the instruction how to properly pronounce Louisville. So
You can say it better with a mint julep in your hand.
that's right. I think that's what needs to happen. All right, I think that it is 6:03 Eastern time. I'm going to go ahead and kick this travel party off. My name is Lauren Garcia Chance, and I'm the outreach manager for the American Public Gardens Association. I'm just going to detail some tech things really quickly. The first of those is that we do have closed captioning available for today's webinar. You can find that closed captioning button down at the bottom of your Zoom. Furthermore, many of our panelists today, or presenters from across our gardens, are willing to take question and answers. So if you have Q&A during those presentations, feel free to put them in either the Q&A function or the chat, and we'll be sure and pose those to our presenters. And then finally, this is being recorded. It will be available on the same website that you utilize to register for this webinar sometime tomorrow, and feel free to go check out the other recordings that have been put up there as well. We are so glad you're joining us in celebrating Go Public Gardens Days. Go Public Gardens Days is the annual spring observance of the American Public Gardens Association's Go Public Gardens campaign, and aims to drive attention and attendance to botanic gardens and arboretum across North America and the world. Many of the association's 600 plus members across all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Canada, and around the world join in this celebration with events, special offers, free days, and hundreds of our gardens have submitted details about their participation at gopublicgardensdays.org. So be sure and go check out that website, and you can locate gardens in your area and filter by the different types of events that are being offered, free deals, etc., by gardens in your area, or perhaps some gardens that you'd like to go venture to and explore, especially after these wonderful presentations. It's my pleasure to introduce also Alexandra Cantwell. Without Alexandra, tonight's webinar would not be possible. She's the one who really conceived of this idea and then managed to get over 20 gardens together in order to bring this free program to you. So Alexandra, do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah, so thank you guys for joining us tonight. I know now after seeing how many people have participated in this program, I'm not the only one who is getting a little stir crazy over the past year, and I really just wanted a way for other public gardens to showcase what they've got going on there and kind of inspire future travels as we begin to get back into the world. So just really excited to get other people excited about going outside and seeing their public gardens. So I know I've been loving the videos that I've seen from other gardens around the United States, and I'm looking forward to the ones further in the week. So definitely make sure that you check out some of our other programming going on. And also just as a reminder to you guys that that YouTube recording is going to be on the website, and it should be up there for a while for you guys to kind of tune back in, go take notes, make sure you can kind of keep tabs on gardens that you want to go check out in person. So again, thank you guys for joining, and I hope to see you guys during the next presentations this week. But other than that, I'm going to pass it off to Cindy Brown with the Smithsonian Gardens, who's going to kick it off for us today. So Cindy, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Alexandra. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to share information and lovely images of Smithsonian Gardens. So shall I just jump right in and get us going? Whoa, that was unusual. Let's try to do that one at a time instead of all of them. That was a sneak preview. So my name is Cindy Brown. I'm the Manager of Collections, Education, and Access at Smithsonian Gardens. And I bet you're wondering, we know Smithsonian have museums, but gardens? If you haven't visited us, you don't realize that around every museum, there is another museum. We are a museum without walls and ceilings, so we are both a public garden and a museum with collections, and we do education, and we reflect the themes of each one of the museums that we surround and engage our visitors with the gardens by interpreting, inspiring, and educating them. So let's just jump right in. Of course, this is an iconic image of the castle, which is the visitor headquarters of Smithsonian. And so this is a good place to start. Get your bearings and find out how many museums that you can visit, and of course, how many of the gardens are around for you to see. The castle is planted with this beautiful parterre in front of it, a beautiful image that is so reflective of the castle. A parterre patterned on the ground is something that you would have found the time the castle was built, before the Civil War. And we continue to engage visitors with this type of garden, very formal. As you move over to the Moongate Garden, which is part of the Enid A. Haupt Garden, which is in front of the castle, you will see a more Asian influence that reflects the garden, or reflects the museum of the Sackler and Freer Museum, which has amazing Asian collections inside of those museums. The Moongate Garden has many moongates, including this one that's laying down, and a pool that reflects the castle on good days. We're going to hop over the wall and go over to one of my favorite gardens, the Mary Livingston Ripley Garden. This garden is a raised garden that was named after the wife of Secretary Ripley, Mary Livingston Ripley, and she visited California. So California, thank you. And when she came back, she said, oh, that space that's between the new Hirshhorn Museum and the Arts and Industries building, I would really like to see that be an accessible garden, not a parking lot, as some of the other Smithsonian members wanted to see at that time. Parking's always important. This, like the Enid A. Haupt Garden, is a rooftop garden. Many of our gardens have museums underneath it, or in this case, the 9th Street Tunnel. So as you're going through the tunnel, imagine this beautiful garden above you. It is engaging too because this garden is the most likely to give you ideas of what you could do in your own garden. It's a small, intimate conversation with a horticulturist that tends this garden. It doesn't have a museum that has to reflect. Rather, it is a reflection on the textures and colors and additions of all kinds of plants that you could get ideas from and take home and improve your garden. Let's go a bit to the north and visit the Catherine Folger Rose Garden. This rose garden is unique, and that Shelley Gaskins, the horticulturist that tends this garden, really wanted to be an earth-friendly rose garden. So she's done her homework, and she's planted the garden with many disease-free or disease-resistant roses. And she's added companion plants that do an amazing job of keeping the garden interesting 3 seasons out of the year, 4 seasons with the evergreens as they grow, the baskets and the urns, and the sculpture that is in the middle of the garden. I highly recommend that you come and visit in May so you can see all these lovely roses and find out more with the interpretive panels about what a rose is, how it's related to an apple. This is a garden that is a true reflection of the museum. Most of our gardens that surround the museums were created after the museums. When you think that natural history was created so many years ago, this one was created at the same time that the museum was built. This is the museum, the National Museum of the American Indian. And the gardens that surround this reflect the plants and the style that was apparent at the time before the colonists came over. These are all plants that are native to our mid-Atlantic area. And the Tiber Creek, which runs through Washington, D.C., is exemplified by this pond that is at the American Indian Museum. We also have a cropland on the south side that has peppers and tomatoes and tobacco that are often used by the museum in their programs and inside the cafeteria for special events. A gorgeous museum that is delightful to visit and unbelievable that you can hear a red-winged blackbird at the foot of our nation's capital. This is our pollinator garden. Our pollinator garden used to be the butterfly garden. It is along the east side of the National Museum of Natural History. So it reflects the museum with bringing the insect zoo outside, because of course the pollinators are going to be, many of them are insects, and they can tell a fuller story about those insects that you may see inside of the Natural History Museum. The pollinator garden used to be the butterfly garden, but when we realized that people didn't understand the importance of all those other little creepy crawlers that visited their gardens, we wanted to tell the full story. So now you can go visit the pollination investigation and find out who are the pollinators, what do they do, why do they do it, and how do they do it. And you will see examples of native plants that will attract pollinators in our mid-Atlantic area. We do have visitors from all over the world, but we've stayed true to the native plants in our area and suggest that people find out what native plants would do similar jobs in their gardens by visiting extension agents and others in their area. And this is our Victory Garden outside the National Museum of American History. Both World War I and World War II were such big parts of our American history, and Victory Gardens played an important role in both of those wars, making our citizens more self-reliant, more engaged, more helpful to their communities by planting crops that they could consume, so that many of the crops that were grown on the farms could be shipped to support our troops and the Allied troops overseas. This garden has a more modern take on a Victory Garden. We have plants not just what you would typically think of being in a Victory Garden, but those that may have been included in Victory Gardens from all different cultures in the United States. This garden hosts many wonderful events, such as Food in the Garden, where panel discussions talk about the importance of American agriculture and the crops that sustain us, both past and now. The Victory Garden also grows hops, and we're very lucky to have a wonderful relationship with the beer curator that is at American History. And we've done programs together to show the importance and the growth of the beer industry in our nation through the years. It's a happy time to be in the Victory Garden. This is Anacostia Community Garden. Anacostia Community Garden isn't downtown around the mall like many of our other gardens around the museums. This is a museum that's off campus, but engages the community that is to the east side of the Anacostia River. This garden was just created 2 years ago with an emphasis on how important native plants are to all communities. The native plants here attract so many pollinators. We've had to add interpretive panels so that the visitors would understand what they were seeing in this garden and why they should be accepting of these visitors that fly, crawl, and hop in. This is our newest museum and our newest garden. This is the National African American History and Culture Garden and Museum. I should say museum first and garden second, because this museum stands out on the landscape. It is a unique design and very symbolic of the African American culture. The garden that is in the front of the museum, so that would be on the north side, is filled with purple crocuses. Purple is a symbolic color within the community, and those colors and those symbolic plant members of the community are entwined throughout the exhibit and throughout the gardens. It is an engaging garden and an engaging museum, and I highly recommend that you visit the next time that you're in Washington, D.C. Our gardens are usually open 365 days out of the year. Of course, we, like many gardens in the United States and elsewhere, were experiencing challenges last year. We were lucky that our gardens were open for the majority of the time. But, as in many areas, we appreciate if you take all the posted safety precautions to keep our gardeners healthy and our visitors healthy. The Rose Garden is beautiful in the spring, but the Ripley Garden is equally beautiful in the winter, when the bones of the gardens can shine through the snow. The quiet solitude of the weight of the snow in the garden is outstanding. Our gardens are used by Washington citizens as well as citizens and visitors from all over the world, and we are delighted to share so many beautiful plants with our visitors. The magic starts at our Smithsonian Gardens facility, the greenhouse facility in Suitland, Maryland. This facility is state-of-the-art, absolutely stunning, and where we start most of our annuals and many of our other plants, including poinsettias, which you'll see too. It houses our tropical plants that are showcased throughout all the gardens, and they host giant palms as well as small begonias that can be kept from year to year and then showcased in the summer when the temperatures are appropriate to have these tropicals out in the garden. They are well tended and beautiful when they are delivered back downtown into the garden. And this is one example of how they are delivered. They must go on the truck, work its way up into the bed of the truck, and slowly go down Suitland Parkway so that the plants aren't jostled and they come to the gardens healthy, green, and full of life. And then the process has to be repeated in the fall when the threats of frost are warned. We have interior plants that are used in exhibits inside of the museums, and those are tended to be useful, whatever the subject is that the museum would like to engage a living collection inside of their historic exhibits. One area that we have that is in between the Smithsonian American Art Museum and the National Portrait Gallery is the Kogod Courtyard. And this is a space that's covered with beautiful handmade glass tiles that shine and keep the space warm. So even in the winter, visitors come to this spot and sit and luxuriate in the green, biophilic atmosphere of this garden. Highly recommended in February when there's a chill in the air. This piece of ingenuity always amazes me. These hanging baskets, which are put in the gardens, mostly off at lampposts, but sometimes off as standard hangers. Not coat hangers, but hangers for gardens. This is a way that we're able to grow the baskets, and they are full on the bottoms and the sides just as much as they are on the top. So just as your dry cleaners has a conveyor belt to take your clothes around and you can search for them, this conveyor belt moves the plants slowly through this greenhouse, and they are watered and fertilized, and they're able to fill out in all directions. I'm always amazed when I go into the greenhouse and see these plants move slowly around as I gaze up in wonder at the beautiful annuals that are used in them. Speaking of annuals, these annuals are being hardened off, being acclimated to the weather, from inside the nice cozy situation inside the greenhouses to outside, and sometimes in very chilly temperatures. Especially this year, we had a pretty chilly spring, and we had to move our tropicals inside and outside the greenhouses several times for threats of frost. But these annuals are blanketing our outside beds, and they will shortly be moved downtown to be put into the gardens. The holidays are amazing, with thousands of poinsettias that are grown for displays inside of the museum and in the Kogod Courtyard. Every year, our horticulturists try new poinsettias to add different colors and new varieties to add different shapes to the displays as well. Inside the greenhouse is also something very special. We have a national orchid collection, and 5 different greenhouses are filled with about 6,000 orchids. This is one of 2 of our living collections. Our Smithsonian has collections with a big C. That means that we follow all the directives that are created by the institution, and we have living collections that follow the same directives. Changing a little bit, of course. Just like the zoo, the care and feeding of these living collections are very important. So our essential employees, our essential horticulturists are always there to tend and take care of those orchids. The orchids are stunning, and you can see our orchids on our website in a tool called Plant Explorer. I highly recommend, if you're an orchid enthusiast, to go to the Plant Explorer website on our website and see many of these gorgeous, gorgeous tropical plants. Education is also important within Smithsonian Gardens. We host a weekly seminar, a weekly webinar, I should say, called Let's Talk Gardens, where our horticulturists and horticulturists from all around the country join us to talk about their specialties. Andrew Bunting, who is Director of Education at the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society, who's in the lower left-hand corner of this image, will join us tomorrow to talk about hydrangeas, one of his favorite topics to discuss. I highly recommend joining us some Thursday at noon to see which of these speakers will be able to make your brown thumb turn green. We also have activities. It's very important for us to engage our virtual visitors. Because we're a national museum, We want to make sure that you can visit our website and engage with us even if you can't visit us in person. So it is wonderful that I'm able to share this with you now so that you can see all the different things that we have available on our website. So coloring pages. We have special virtual events like Magnolia Madness. The saucer magnolias bloom here right about the same time as the cherry blossoms. And we often hear, those are the biggest cherry blossoms we've ever seen. Of course, we know they're magnolias. So we go crazy at that time of the year to share all of our terrific magnolia species. And this year we had a terrific collection of images online to engage our virtual visitors. We also use story maps to lead you through the gardens and show you more about our tree collection, for one thing. We also have a cherry blossom or a cherry tree collection, not as many as that's down on the tidal basin, but perhaps more diverse than what you would see on the tidal basin. So the story maps will be your guide through our gardens. As you sit in your armchairs at home, you can be engaged with us too. Here's the Plant Explorer, the terrific tool that we use to show you images and tell you more about our living collections, our trees, and our orchids. Of course, you can stay engaged with us through all social media accounts. Our Instagram account was named the #3 Instagram account in all public gardens. We're so happy to have so many followers and so many visitors, and we do our very best to keep you engaged with what's going on in the gardens every single day, as well as what's going on in our archives and with our living collections. Because we do have collections. They're beautiful. I've mentioned the orchid and the tree, but we have an artifact collection, benches and urns and lampposts that are in the gardens that you can see. A wonderful artifact collection of little tussy muslies, these beautiful little garden pins and boutonnieres that were popular in the late 1800s with women so that they could carry their gardens around with them everywhere. We also have the Archives of American Gardens, a digital archive that shares images and stories of gardens from 1914 until the present. And we'll continue to gather more and more submissions to be able to tell stories of America's gardens. The orchids you've seen in the orchid collection are shared once every other year at the orchid exhibit that we host in different museums. This one was Amazing Adaptations and the Kogod Courtyard. The information is available online, so if you weren't able to visit us during the orchid exhibit, you can always visit us online. Our tree collection does an amazing job of telling stories of Washington, D.C. area. This is our #1 elm tree, and it is outside the National Museum of Natural History. This tree is older than the museum, so it was on this corner of Constitution and 9th Street before the museum was start to be built in the 1880s. Great stories could be told if this tree could talk. Well, instead of the tree talking, we do it for you. So we have created interpretive panels that tell stories of many of our witness trees, including the #1 elm. And here are those beautiful little tussy mussies, those beautiful little boutonnieres and garden holders that were carried around. This is one of many online exhibits that we have. Even though this is an exhibit that's in our Ripley Center, an underground museum, we also have it online so that you can visit this online exhibit and learn more about these perfect little jewels, these little creations that helped women carry their gardens around with them everywhere. Habitat is our first campus-wide exhibit, and we came about this theme because we wanted to show the importance of how protecting habitat protects life. Each one of these exhibits are in the gardens around the museums, and they were the only exhibits that were open until Smithsonian recently started to reopen their museums. We were so happy to be able to educate our visitors and inform them about this very important topic. In the Fountain Garden, which is part of the Enid A. Haupt Garden outside of the African Art Museum and behind the castle, is a coral reef. A coral reef made with succulents and dwarf conifers to talk about the importance of foundation species and how the coral reef is really a universe all unto itself and how it supports many different species with the coral that is the individual animals, not plants, but animals. And in the pollinator garden, we created these big, oversized uh, sculptures of bugs, and we called it Bugs B&B. So we would help people understand the importance of leaving pieces of the garden up and standing during the museum, in their gardens at all times of the year to be able to host the pollinators that are in their gardens. It's fun to see the 6-foot tall praying mantis and this beautiful little monarch butterfly. In the Moongate Garden, we have oversized dragonflies, which serve as indicator species. Dragonflies, the presence of dragonflies shows how clean the water is that they are inhabiting. Without the dragonflies, you know that there's something wrong with the water. So this helps indicate the health of the body of the water that the dragonflies inhabit. And of course, we want to make sure that we bring it home to you. The things that you can do in your gardens are talked about and made examples of in the Ripley Garden so that you know how you can help as a home gardener. You do not have to work in a public garden to be able to help habitats. You are the best ones to help us out. And the archives of American Gardens is something that makes Smithsonian Gardens unique. We are the public garden that has access and holds images of many of our public gardens, but now we just take images of private gardens so that we can help keep track of the trends in gardens and how gardens really do influence or show how the politics, the cultural events, the economic level is what's going on in the United States. You can always relate it back to what's going on in a garden in America. And our collection is filled with images from landscape architects, from professional photographers, garden writers, and we have other things like this Burpee collection. We have the largest collection of W. Atlas Burpee Foundation, including stories about how Early Girl Tomato was named after the granddaughter of W. Atlas Burpee, and Big Boy was named after his grandson. Images pop into my head of what that says about the personalities of his two grandchildren and how they relate to his tomatoes and marketing. The glass lantern slides don't look like much when you just hold them up and view them in hand. They have to be placed in a magic lantern. Just like our PowerPoints are of no use just on a thumb drive, this needs a conduit to be able to show the beauty of the images. The images were taken in black and white, but many colorists were hired to be able to add color to those black and white images. Often these were women that worked in studios so that they could painstakingly paint those little, looks like salvia, I'm not sure. Salvia's pink, and make the boxwoods green. This collection of private gardens is sometimes the only thing that is left of a historic garden, whether it be private or public. And it is a delight to be able to review these on our website and see what private gardens are from your area. You can go on and you can see what we have in our collection. And these private gardens tell of a time that's lost when there was more labor to be used in private gardens, perhaps more funds to be used in private gardens, and how we've changed in our own gardens using more native plants and perhaps less water gardens. Views that may no longer be there. Gardens are ephemeral, and these glass lantern slides, as well as Kodaks and 35 milliliters and millimeters, and as well as digital slides that are coming in now, may be the only relic of this garden left. I love looking at it to see what was in fashion at the time and what could inspire me if I have a historic garden. What could I add to bring it back to its previous glory? Thornwood is one of those examples. Thornwood in Washington State was one of those gardens like Longwood and Chanticleer and Faioli that everyone would come to visit and see what was going on in the perennial beds. This garden was so important that color charts were created so that gardeners could emulate the colors that they saw in this garden, and they could buy something in a catalog that they could be sure that would be an example of the exact same color that they would see at Thornwood. Thornwood, however, does not look like this anymore. Thornwood has changed, and this is what it looked like in 1998. And although the gardens are still lovely, you can see the difference that time has made, both in the collection and in what's left in the garden. These private gardens are wonderful to visit because you can see some of the prime examples of gardens in states all over the United States. And you can see this perfect example of arts and craft prairie garden, prairie house. In this example, how important it was to have a food garden. Now, this is a new addition. This wasn't in the garden when it was first built. And how the additions have kept this garden coming up to date. So this garage was built underneath the house, so it wouldn't impact the silhouette of the house. But what ingenuity to use hanging begonias to mask this underground garage and keep it in tune with the garden that surrounds it. The archives are also a place that we can see how our gardens are changing. The importance of gardens, healing gardens in our hospitals, and how we understand that being in a garden will help our health, help our mental well-being, as well as our physical well-being. It shows the importance that we have made on creating school gardens, schoolyard gardens, and how the students engage with them, and how the community helps out with teaching students responsibility, cooking, things about different cultures, history. All that can be shared in a schoolyard garden. So we're collecting many examples of schoolyard gardens. And what are those items that are of most importance to gardeners right now? Before, it may have been water gardening, but now we see an uptick in keeping your own beehives with these two beautiful bee skeps in this garden. We're always promoting women that have made an impact on our American gardens. Women's stories are important for us because often they are lost. They are hidden behind the men that are featured, our landscape architects, our landscape designers. And we are now pulling out these important stories and doing research so that we understand more. This is a Julie Moore Missouri garden. And so telling her story, as well as many women gardeners in the past, is important. And we have the American Historic Women Initiative that we are connecting with our gardens and with the archives. We can't forget our garden writers and how important their gardens have been, as well as the stories that they tell. So we have many examples of garden writers gardens in our archives, including this one with Gordon Hayward, who is a delightful gardener and a delightful writer. We have to save those stories. I think it's a really good example of how these images can tell us stories of things we don't do anymore. This is a picture, an image that was created by Horace McFarland, a rosarian and a photographer that took many pictures of rose gardens to share in magazines such as Better Homes and Gardens and House Beautiful. And I always like to point this out in a lecture that I always dress like this when I'm spraying DDT on my roses to make sure that I don't have any unwanted insects. So this is a glimpse into our past and helps tell a fuller story of how we tended our gardens. And luckily, we don't do this anymore. It also tells stories of what we hold most dear to us. And even if we don't have what we think is a traditional garden, this is a garden. The concrete jungle outside of Philadelphia with its collection of plants. It's designed, all the containers are blue, upright structures, the pathways have been thought out, and it was a way for this gentleman to be able to have a garden in a space that normally would have just been concrete. So these are the kinds of stories that we're gathering so that we can share them with everyone, so we can see what has happened in our American gardens and what continues to change. We'd also like to hear about your garden, your favorite garden. Doing a submission for Archives of American Gardens takes time and patience, but you can tell us your story easily by going on to Community of Gardens, share a couple pictures, share some stories about your garden, your grandmother's garden, your favorite community garden. My favorite story that just came in recently was a young man, 13 years old, that was home during the pandemic last year, and he had to do a STEM project. So he was a runner, a marathon runner, and he loved to read stories about some of his Kenyan idols that were also marathon runners. And he noticed a common theme about how many of those runners had home gardens. So he decided for his STEM project that he would create an edible garden in his backyard. He enlisted the help of his father and his sister, and his story tells of the success of the different edibles that they grew and how he enjoyed having a garden during the pandemic. So please tell us your story. Go online and share your story so we have more information about the Everyman's Garden. We're here to engage, inform, and inspire, and our website, gardens.si.edu, is here for you to visit and learn more about Smithsonian Gardens as a museum and a series of public gardens. Thank you for joining me and Alexandra. Now I'm trying to remember who is going to be back on to be able to answer questions or ask me questions. It's you, Lauren. I was trying to remember who it was going to be. I know you told me, but I couldn't remember.
No, you're good.
But
hi, thank you so much, Cindy.
Certainly. I don't know if there's any questions or if people have any. Oh, great. Okay.
There sure are. Yeah, my head is spinning. That was a whirlwind tour.
That was a fast tour.
Collections and some behind the scenes. That was wonderful. Thank you, Cindy. And we definitely have some questions. So the first of those questions is whenever you were talking about the African American Museum, you have been talking about the color purple. And so one of our attendees asked, what is the significance of purple within the African American community?
I could make something up, but I'm not going to. I would highly suggest go onto the website. I know the colors are white and blue and purple, and all those have significance. But I would highly recommend you go to the website and read about the significance on the web page that we have created for that garden. Purple, in the instance of the crocuses, I know the significance of that because it's to symbolize the ocean, that the enslaved people were brought across to come to America. And so that ocean was the barrier between their land and this new land that they were forcefully brought to. So we couldn't recreate an ocean, but the purple crocuses are what we've used instead to tell that story. But for the bigger symbolism, I'm not quite sure. That is the symbolism that I understand.
Thank you, Cindy. The next question: does the Smithsonian sponsor orchid shows, and are they open to the public? And if so, which facilities are they held in?
That's a great question. So yes, we have an orchid exhibit, and we co-host the orchid exhibit with the U.S. Botanical Garden. So one year it's in the Botanic Garden, the other year it's at Smithsonian Gardens. And we each, the museum where it's hosted, or the Botanic Garden, public garden that it's hosted, gets to decide the theme. So every year we work with the museums, and they all want to host us. So the exhibit is in great demand because it's a time when, like I said, it's beautiful. It adds beauty to the museum when it could be cold and dark outside and snowy sometimes too. It is open to the public. Our next exhibit will be in 2022. We'll open up January 29th at the Kogod Courtyard once again. It is a beautiful space with lots of natural light to be able to see the orchids in, and we're very excited to be back there. But who knows where it will be in 2024, 2023. It will be at the Botanic Garden, which is our neighbor right downtown.
Thank you, Cindy. There was lots of interest in the plant finder pages that you discussed in your presentation. And so there were some requests that if you would mind sharing that link in the chat with our attendees, maybe after we get done here, so that they can utilize that plant finder. That would be wonderful.
Certainly.
If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to drop those into the chat or the Q&A, and I'll be sure and direct those. And if not, we can, I'm sure Cindy might stick around for a few more minutes and be willing to answer those.
Certainly.
So,
okay.
All right.
Well,
Seeing none, thank you so much,
well,
Cindy. I
thank
greatly
you.
appreciate it. Thank
Well,
you.
it's been my pleasure, let me tell you. I love to share the gardens. They are a very special place around the museums, and we are just so very happy that we get so many visitors, and we look forward to seeing many of you in the upcoming years.
Indeed. It's amazing to find out the connections between those gardens and those museums. So thank you.
Exactly. All right. Thank you all. Well, I'll see you
Thank you.
later.
Bye. So while Cindy is shutting down the Smithsonian, we're about to gear up and travel across the US to California, where we're going to next be exploring Ventura Botanical Gardens. Ventura Botanical Gardens is supposed to kick off at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And so in order to give people who maybe will want to join into that presentation time to join us, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break. So if everybody needs to, go grab a drink or take a quick break, feel free to do so. And we will be back here at 7 p.m. Eastern time. So in 10 minutes, we'll be kicking this back off again. So please enjoy and feel free to put any questions into the Q&A. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed that slight break. We just wanted to make sure that anyone who wanted to join us at 7 o'clock for our next garden was able to make it and join us in time. Thank you so much for being here. We're very excited to kick off our next garden. So as I've mentioned, we're going to travel from Washington, D.C. across the United States to Ventura, California, where we are now going to have the opportunity to explore Ventura Botanical Gardens. So while we actually have some incredible Ventura garden staff and volunteers on today's webinar with us, they have a special treat for us in the sense that they have put together a wonderful video highlighting all that they are doing at Ventura Botanical Gardens. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share that video with you.
Welcome to Ventura Botanical Gardens. This is Joanne Wilson and I'm Lori McWhorter. We are docents, volunteers, and also volunteer for the Educational Committee. Today we're going to show you our collection of Mediterranean as well as California native plants. But first, a word from Derek Wilson, the president of the Board of Directors.
Well, hello, my name is Derek Wilson. I'm the current president of the Ventura Botanical Gardens. And the Ventura Botanical Gardens is a 109-acre world-class site which offers spectacular views of the California coastline, the California Channel Islands, agricultural vistas, and the Topa Peak Mountains. We have a 40-year master plan, and we represent the 5 Mediterranean climates in the world: the Chilean, Cape of South Africa, South Australia, Mediterranean Basin, and the California. These Mediterranean climates are low water climates, so very conducive to Ventura. The Ventura Botanical Gardens started as an idea with a group of citizens decades ago. And these citizens had gone to different botanical gardens throughout the country and came back and decided, wow, we should have something like this in our own backyard. They started looking at different sites, and we got into a partnership with the city of Ventura, which had a large park. The park was granted back in early 1900s, but it had never been developed. So in 2015, we got into a contract with the city of Ventura to develop a 40-year lease to develop the 109 acres in back of our city hall.
This area of California is the traditional lands of the Native Americans known as the Chumash. We honor their ancestors and continue the care of this land.
Our challenges for caring for the garden have been drought and fire. After 5 years of drought, a fire known as the Thomas Fire swept all of these hillsides. It destroyed 8,000 plants. But like the mythical phoenix, we rose from the ashes. Now the hillsides are covered with over 20,000 plants. We have been able to rebuild a nursery, a welcome center, and we continue. Watching this process of regeneration has shown us how truly resilient nature is.
We're now in the Chilean garden. Welcome to Chile. The plants here are located as they would be at the elevations in Chile, with soft leaf plants in the coastal area, and then up to shrubs and trees in the matorral. The matorral corresponds to our California chaparral, with plants with deep roots for our dry territory. I'd like to give you an example of one of these plants. It's the Shynus latifolia behind me. We love this plant because it's so useful in many ways. The sprouts can heal your gums. There's a purgative that's helpful for hemorrhoids. And if you mix the crushed pulp with maize, you can make an alcoholic drink called chicha. This is a soap bark tree, and it can be used for soap. You can wash your hair. It also has a compound that stimulates our immune system, so it's been successfully used in the vaccine for shingles and now in the vaccine for COVID-19.
The palms that I am standing by are known as Chilean wine palms. They're coquitos, or their little fruit, and the pulp inside are harvested to make wine. These trees will grow up to 60 or 70 feet, and the growing of these palms is a long time, over 100 years. The people of Chile love their wine so much that these palms are actually going extinct. If they need to repopulate this area, we will have the seeds for them. Also, it's interesting to note that these palms, you can see in this stump of our largest, were burned to a crisp. We thought we'd lost them, but look how they recovered. This plant is known as the tarla tree, and it is a very functional and useful plant on the savanna. Cattlemen will take these shrubs and put them together to form large thickets, and these thickets provide fencing for cattle. The cattle don't go near this plant because if you look very carefully, you'll notice there's lots of sticky thorns here. It's nature's version of barbed wire.
As volunteers were building the rock walls as retaining walls for our trail, they uncovered older walls like these. We've discovered that masons from New Mexico say that this style of masonry was popular during the mission era, so we think that perhaps the Chumash built these walls for terraces during our mission era. As you walk up the trail, you'll find lots of informational signs. This one talks about Chilean plant communities. This sign shows the cacti and succulents endemic to Chile. There are 180 varieties, and one of the goals of the Ventura Botanical Gardens is to have the largest collection of cacti and succulents outside the country of Chile. This is an Aristolochia chilensis. The flowers emit a pungent odor that attracts flies. The anemone-like flowers draw the fly in so they can pollinate.
This tree is one of our favorites. It was planted by a volunteer who grew it from a seed he picked up when he was in Chile. This acacia will probably grow to be 25 feet. It was charred beyond belief by the fires, and we thought we had lost it. Tourists from the Savannah area assured us, oh no, they'll be back. And sure enough, look at it. Instead of being brown and black, it now has yellow flowers. The Chilean people love this plant because they can use their berries for a substitute for coffee. The tannins from its seeds are actually used as a blood coagulant. Also, its wood is very, very hard, so it's used for furniture and for tools.
This plant is related to the pineapple. It's called a puya. We say puya. Everybody say it, puya. There are lots of varieties of puya. The young tender shoots are edible in salads. You can make a cream for moisturizer, and yet the fibers are strong enough to be used as timber to hold up a roof. In one section of our garden, we have a Puya bertoniana. which will send up a shoot 15 feet tall with beautiful turquoise flowers.
As we deal with the issues of the climate getting drier, up on the hill may be our answer to our water situation. If you look to the hillside, you'll notice a gray-black square, and it's actually a fog catcher. This is a traditional method of getting water. It was used in the driest, highest desert in all Chile, the Atacama Valley and that area. The people that are indigenous of this area would stretch screens or mesh over boxes and let the clouds go through it, condensing moisture on the net. This drops into containers, and that's their source of water. It's a very pure form of water, and it's being monitored currently worldwide. We have different stations, such as the one above, that actually monitor the intake as well as the regularity of water. So someday we may be hearing much more about fog catchers. This concludes our visit to the Chilean garden. Coming up next is the Ramble, which is designated as a California native flower restoration. The Ramble is not designated as a formal garden. Its purpose is for restoration and conservation of native California plants. Over the past 2 centuries, this whole area has been farmed, grazed, and burnt many times. That left it open for lots and lots of invasive plants. The Ramble also includes an area known as the Environmental Enhancement and Mitigation Program, better known as the EEMP zone. This is an area where we're exclusively looking at plants that are indigenous to this area and are endangered. Okay, we are also restoring 2 zones of native California habitat, the coastal sage scrub and the chaparral.
The coastal sage scrub is a community of plants that extends from the coast, flatlands, to the foothills. They consist of woody plants with soft leaves that stand about 6 feet tall. The roots are pretty shallow, and there's bare ground in between each plant. They're deciduous, that means they lose their leaves in dry summers, but they're drought tolerant and fire adapted. Some examples are the California buckwheat, golden yarrow, mallows, and of course, lots of sage. One of the most aromatic sages is our California sage, Artemisia californica. This sage has a nice, clean aroma, and it can be used in cooking just like a culinary sage. It smells like turkey dinner. In the past, the Cahuilla natives used this for colds and coughs. If you had trouble sleeping, a shaman might recommend that you put this in your bedroll. And then along came the cowboys, and it got the name cowboy sage because the cowboys would rub themselves with this aromatic sage when they couldn't take a bath. So I call this cowboy cologne. Another plant in the coastal sage scrub is the giant ryegrass. We have new shoots at my feet, and last year's shoots are in this stand behind me. The Spanish name is carrizo, and before the cattlemen overgrazed the carrizo in this area, the Chumash collected aphid residue from the grass and processed a nice sweet treat, sort of like honey. Our native bees don't make honey, so the Chumash used that as an important trade item. The dry stalks are straight and strong, and they used those for arrow shafts. We love the giant ryegrass. It was the first plant to pop up after the Thomas Fire, and you can see its picture is on my shirt.
The chaparral is composed of deep-rooted, evergreen, very thick, leathery leaf plants. Generally, plants of the chaparral will grow to between 6 and 20 feet. The zone where the chaparral grows starts in the mountain area, in their foothills, but also is very successful to adapting along the coast. Chaparral means, in Spanish, little oak. It has an intense root system which helps it to survive fires. It is primarily fire adaptive. Germination occurs after the fire. One of the aspects of the plants such as these is that it will be growing on hillsides, and so it really helps with erosion and slides. Examples of the chaparral are the ceanothus, the elderberry tree, and one of our favorites, the pink lemonade berry tree. The lemonade berry tree is one of our favorites. It has a wonderful flower that when it forms a bud actually tastes just like pink lemonade. The Chumash people prize this plant because it was their source of vitamin C, and especially on a long run, they could pop one of the berries into their mouths and moisten them. When they had a dry mouth, you would suck on one of the berries from this particular flower, and you'd be good to go. You can see this thicket is very thick, and when it grows to be 14 to 20 feet, it's impassable. You just cannot get through it. Another tree that was prized by the Chumash people is the elderberry. This tree's wood was very important in making ceremonial instruments. The Chumash people do not have drums. They use instead a clapper stick. And this wood was very much used for that instrument as well as for ceremonial flutes. Another thing that the Chumash used the elderberry for was taking the flower from these buds and making a tea that actually cured coughs and colds. It's interesting that today, during the pandemic, people have used elderberry products to rev up their immune system. You can buy it as a tea, syrup, and also as a capsule form. You can go to the health food part of your supermarket and get that. As the Chumash healer once said, it is our music tree, because the Chumash got wood for their ceremonial instruments from this tree. It is our heartbeat because they used it for so many things to calm themselves, such as tea, and it restores the natural flow. We have arrived at the third area of our garden that represents the fynbos area, which is the Cape of South Africa. Behind me is the Cape Floral Garden. Fynbos is a word from Dutch Afrikaans, which means fine leaf shrub or plant. We have our collection here on the hill that is growing readily because we have similar climate, soil, and terrain.
Our small plot of land here showcases many species, just as the fine boss does in Africa. It is a concentrated space with rich biodiversity. The fine boss in Africa has been designated a World Heritage Site because of its vast biological diversity. The soil is quartz, limestone, sandstone, and is actually pretty nutrient poor. So it's remarkable that such a variety of plants grow in a nutrient poor environment. Here at the Ventura Botanical Gardens, we're constantly securing more species and plants to increase our collection so that we can mimic as best we can the incredible biodiversity of the fine boss.
Scientists suggest that the reason for all of this plant diversity in such a small area is the result of evolution of many different pollinators and animals forming a symbiotic relation and helping one another. The leucospermum is a great example of that. This flower's favorite pollinator is an ant. The ants come to the flower, and especially the seed area, and munch upon the lovely elaeosome. This is a part of the seed pod that is fleshy, and the ants just love to eat it. So what they do is they take the elaeosome seeds back to their nests and of course disperse them. The great thing about this process is all of the seed is underground and away from predators such as hungry birds. The leucospermum need pollinators. The flower is hermaphroditic, and the pollen is infertile. So it must depend on a variety of insects, birds, small animals to do the pollination. Okay, here at the gardens, none of our insects or birds have developed a specialized relationship with these plants. However, the terrain, especially all of this nice chipped wood, provides a habitat and food for such small animals as the chipmunks, gophers unfortunately, and moles, and that draws coyotes, bobcats, foxes to the area. Also, this beautiful area is just visited by lots and lots of birds who pollinate our leucospermum, leucodendron, freesias, ericas, and of course our wonderful amaryllis bulbs.
Fire plays an important role in the fine boss. It's simple. No fire, no fine boss. In fact, the plants have evolved to require fire to complete their life cycles. They require it at least every 45 years. The fire burns dead material that recycles nutrients into the soil. The chemicals in fire, like ammonia, stimulate the proteas to bloom. For other plants, the seedlings will sprout about a year after the fire. So in a fire zone, all the plants are about the same age. A good example of a fire-dependent plant is the leucodendron. It holds its seeds locked in these cones that are released in the intense heat of a fire. The rebirth after a fire happens quickly. About a week after the fire, green shoots emerge from the charred dirt, and a few months later, the whole area will be in full bloom. Ironically, the best time to see the fine boss is after a fire. Unfortunately, after our Thomas fire, we did not see new growth because our plants were young and immature. But here at the Ventura Botanical Gardens, we do not need fire to propagate our plants. We're always acquiring new species and increasing our collection to showcase the resilient plants of the fynbos.
Let's continue our walk through the Cape of South Africa to our last and most exotic garden, the Karoo. This garden below is our Karoo garden. It is patterned after the Little Karoo Valley, which is a succulent enthusiast paradise. The most prominent aloe in this collection is the giant tree Feryx. Thank you for sharing our dream come true. You have seen the rebirth of 3 of our Mediterranean biomes that were devastated by fire. We plan in the future to add an Australian garden and a garden which will be a collection of plants found around the Mediterranean. If you're ever in sunny California, please come by and see us. Goodbye.
That was an amazing adventure to the Ventura Botanical Gardens. Thank you so much for that opportunity. And thank you to all the volunteers and docents that have joined us tonight. I know that many of you are out there, and so a question was put into our Q&A, and maybe one of you can chime in the chat or let us know the answer. But somebody was wondering, are the blue or turquoise puyas blooming? P. alpestris or P. berteroniana. So really great question. Great job on the scientific names there. And if any of our docents or volunteers are in the audience to answer that, we'd appreciate it. Otherwise, might have to just go check that out yourself in person somehow. So thank you so much. We are looking for our last presenter. If you are actually in the audience as an attendee, if you will somehow give me an indication of that so I can add you as an actual presenter. Otherwise, we may be hanging out for just a second while I try and get them on the line here. So just one moment. Brian, are you in the audience? Oh, there we go. Okay, found you. let me get you added in here. Sorry about that. Just one second. Let me find you in this list to add you as a presenter. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. Brian is going to kind of spur the moment, get set up here, and then we will be heading off across California to Ruth Bancroft Garden and Nursery. So thank you so much, Brian, for joining us. And Brian, let me make sure I've got you set up here to be able to talk and open your video.
Are we unmuted now?
You are unmuted now, and we've got you live. Hey,
Very
Brian,
good. I was
so
very
great.
excited to see the Ventura Garden, which I had not been to, and I noticed that the the little typing down below, had a hard time with Carew and wanted it to be C-R-E-W instead of K-A-R-O-O. But wonderful to see all those plants growing. A lot of things we're familiar with from the Ruth Bancroft Garden.
Excellent. Perfect. It is so great to have both you and Alice here. Hi, Alice. So glad you're able to join too. And Brian, thank you so much. I'm so glad we were able to get you on. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you tell us all about Ruth Bancroft.
Okay, so I'm the curator at the Ruth Bancroft Garden, which is in Walnut Creek, California, about 30 miles east of San Francisco, but in a very different climate zone. So San Francisco being right on the coast and a very fog-bound place is a completely different climate from Walnut Creek, which is an inland valley and much hotter in the summertime and also much colder in the wintertime. There are a lot of heat-loving plants we can grow well in Walnut Creek that don't like San Francisco, and there are lots of frost-intolerant plants that do fine in San Francisco that won't grow here. So anyway, that's a little introduction to where we are in the scheme of things climate-wise. Ruth Bancroft started planting this garden in 1972. So it's not an ancient garden, but it was a very radical thing to do in 1972. This is a suburban area, and it was considered heretical to take out your lawn and your junipers and plant succulents and such in 1972. But Ruth had a nice chunk of property to work with and a lot of plants in pots, and she just set about planting them with gusto. And so the area had been a walnut orchard before. It was a part of the old Bancroft farm, which had both walnut trees and pears as well. And as the land was rezoned from agricultural to residential, then a lot of this farmland was taken out of production, and the Bancrofts finally wound up with 11 acres. And of that acres, 3 still had walnut trees on them. So those were removed in 1971, and that left the space open for Ruth to start planting her garden. So that's just what she did. So she was already growing succulent plants before then, but didn't have a large garden to plant them in. So what we're seeing on the screen here is a picture of her original little succulent garden, which was, maybe a quarter the size of a house. So it was a pretty small area, but she planted, you can see here, aloes and echeverias, and there is an Austrocylindropuntia, a columnar cactus over on the right-hand side of the screen. This is another view of that garden with aloes in bloom. And on the left-hand side, you can see the stalk of an agave. That's agave villamoriniana, the octopus agave. And that was quite an event for her when that came into flower. So this was in 1969, so before the current garden was created. So this is looking at the area that was turned into the desert garden later on, but when the walnut trees were still here. So you can see there's some irises and bulbs in the foreground, redbud tree. Then beyond that are the walnut trees. So these are the ones that were taken out to leave room for the garden. And here is looking more or less in the same direction much later, 25 years later, actually. So you can see the irises in the foreground, and then all the cacti and succulents and so forth behind. And this is again looking in the same direction. You can see again the irises in the foreground, but this is when the garden was just being started. So the trenches you see are the irrigation lines being put in. The little truck there in the background is Bancroft Road, the juncture between the Bancroft's driveway and Bancroft Road. And you can see across the street, there's still orchards at that time. So this is not the way it looks at all now. It's all suburbia all around at present. And this is the beginning of the construction of the garden. So this is Lester Hawkins. He was a nurseryman and landscaper who lived in Occidental California, north of us. And Ruth retained him to do a plan for the garden. So he set out, where the paths would be, and he also was very influential in Ruth's thinking because he thought there ought to be a water feature in the middle of the garden. If you're going to have all this dry growing stuff and succulents and cacti and so on, the water would be a great counterpoint. So Ruth liked that idea. She liked water lilies anyway. And so she put a pool right in the middle of the garden. This is one of the beds when it was first planted. So this was in 1972, the very first year of the garden. And so you can see that a lot of amendments have been added and the bed has been mounded up with lots of rocks placed in there, and some dudleyas have been planted there on the slope there. And so that's the fresh planted look. And then here is the hole being dug for the pool. On the top left of the photo, you can see that same rock mound we saw in the previous picture. So this is just the very beginnings of the garden in 1972. Then this is the beginning of the construction of the shade houses in 1972. So on the left-hand side is the driveway going back to the Bancroft home. The home is visible in the background. And so this was the area that was going to be the entrance to the garden. So Ruth decided to have a pair of shade houses flanking the entrance. And here they are a little bit farther along with the framing in place and the white painted lower panels there. And here is Ruth kneeling at the center and her husband Phil on the right with the hose starting to fill up the pool after the pool was ready to be filled up with water. Well, that very first winter in late 1972, in December, there was a severe freeze and there's snow on the ground. And this was a freeze of uncommon severity. And at the middle of the picture, you can see Butea capitata, the jelly palm. And that was actually a survivor of the freeze, but many other plants were not. There is the pool at the, with ice on it after that event. And you can see snow on the plants behind. And this is what some of the aloes looked like in the aftermath of that freeze. Completely turned to mush. There was no saving these plants, and a lot of them were just killed outright. And you can see beyond the two shade houses, after they were finished, they were painted green and had shade cloth put over them. The one on the left, you can see has plastic over it to keep the rain off. And this is the next spring in 1973 with the beginning of the replanting of the garden. So she decided she needed more shade in the garden because it was pretty harsh, all that open space. And she liked the idea of having trees that would make pools of light and shadow as you went through the garden. And so Lester actually brought her quite a few trees, some eucalypts and so forth that she planted around the garden. Here is another view from 1973. On the right-hand lower corner of the picture, you can see that same palm that we saw in the snow, Butea capitata. So that was a survivor. But she went and replanted all the aloes and agaves and things that had not made it. And here we see the planting well along with lots and lots of agaves and yuccas and so forth planted. And you'll notice in the picture there's some odd looking sort of standing slats, wooden slats. And that's what Ruth used to shade a plant when she first planted it until it got acclimatized to the outdoors. And Ruth had an architect friend, and he designed for her a gazebo to span the space between the two shade houses and sort of tie the whole thing together. So this is that under construction. And let's see, this was in September 1973. And this is from atop that gazebo looking down, and that's the Bancroft Drive on the right and Bancroft Road with the cars going by behind. And you can see some of the agaves looking pretty large already. And at the middle there, lower middle, is an English oak, which is one of the trees Ruth planted. And here we are looking at the pool in the spring of 1974, when the garden was only a couple of years old. And you can see the water lilies have done very nicely. And there are some yuccas and agaves and aloes in bloom on the right-hand side. So you can see some of the things starting to fill in, but there's still a lot of open space at this stage. And that is what the pool looked like 13 years later in 1987. So considerable fill in. Those are pinyon pines on the left-hand side of the picture, and some phormiums on the right with the sun catching their leaves. And so this is in 1976 when Ruth started adding this rock to the garden. So she didn't like the look of all the bare soil, and she wanted to have a rocky appearance of the beds, so it looked like a desert landscape. And so she approached different quarries trying to find a suitable material, and finally she did find a quarry that had something she liked. And this was a brownish rock, and it's really what they scraped aside to get at the gray rock that they were quarrying for roadbed rock. And it was too crumbly for them, but it was just right for Ruth. So she got an enormous amount of it, and she spread it all around, covering the beds and also the finer material covering the paths, so that the whole garden was of a piece, this brownish rocky appearance. And she liked the way that all made it hang together. So this is in the early days. She relied a lot on ice plants in the springtime to give splashes of color. And this is April 1976 with Lampranthus in flower in yellow and orange in the foreground, and some aloes beyond that. Actually, at the very middle, there's actually a yucca flower too. That's Ruth's house on the left, which is no longer visible from the garden because there's a large oleander hedge that's built up in between. And here is Yucca carnarissana with aloes in bloom around it in 1976. And so this is a rather large growing yucca. And you can see at this point here, it had achieved a good diameter, but not much height. So let's look and see what that looks like later on. So let's jump forward 28 years. And now that yucca is very tall, and with that incredible flower coming out the top of it. Here is the completed gazebo and shade houses, looking quite elegant, and that was the official entrance to the garden. No longer is, though. And this is a bed in the middle of the garden that Ruth put shade cloth in an arc over. And the reason for that was, before the trees had grown in, there wasn't much shade, and she thought a lot of plants would appreciate a little bit of shade. So she made this structure with the shade cloth on it. And then after that disastrous freeze in our very first winter, she decided to use this same structure to stretch plastic over to have a safe harbor in the wintertime for things that were more cold sensitive. So that's what you see here. And also all around the garden, she placed little covers with plastic on them to protect plants in the wintertime. That was the lesson of that terrible freeze year. And here we see more of those. So there were a great many of these, not as many now. We've sought to reduce these because we have so many visitors now in the wintertime who want to be able to see the plants and not have a plastic cover over them. So we have grouped the more sensitive plants in that covered bed or underneath tree canopies where there's some protection from that, and don't have all these covers all over the place. And this is the west side of the garden. So initially she had developed the middle of the garden, and this western side was left pretty much empty. And so this is her starting to plant it. And this is an area where she concentrated on native California plants. This is the northeast corner of the garden, which that's the Bancroft Drive behind. And there was a gravel turnout area. And this is where Ruth built a greenhouse. So here we can see the completed greenhouse with the cactus collection in it and some aloes as well. And this is looking out into the garden from the gazebo. Let's see, this would be in 1988. And in the middle of the picture with those green flowers, that's Puya chilensis. We just heard a little bit of talk about Puya berteroniana. This is its close relative, but with chartreuse flowers instead of blue-green flowers like berteroniana, but both spectacular Chilean Puyas. And here is another picture of the garden in 1990, and that's Calliandra tweediae with the red flowers on the left-hand side, Aloe striata in bloom at the bottom of the picture, and the California fan palms rising above. Those are much taller now than they were then. Another picture of the garden in 1990. The bursts of white at the bottom are a cactus from Argentina, Trichocereus candicans in full bloom. And the little bit of red there at the bottom is an aloe. And that's a Yucca fillifera on the left-hand side, which is at least 3 times that big by now. This is Nolina matapensis in June 2003. So this was quite an event for us because this Nolina at that time was quite unknown in horticulture. So we were one of the first gardens to flower it. It comes from Sonora in northwestern Mexico. And here is Lampranthus spectabilis with those brilliant magenta colors at the bottom, and Acacia pendula with those weeping branches above it. And then at the right is the Mexican blue palm, Brahea armata. So Ruth really liked this with all this silvery colors of the foliage with this underlining of magenta at the bottom. And here is a view looking through the garden in 1990 with Yucca thompsoniana on the left-hand side in flower and some prickly pears on the right-hand side. And then we had another freeze, and that was in 1990, in December 1990, as severe as the freeze in 1972 had been. And so this had been a magnificent flower, the aloe in flower the year before, and now turned to mush. So this was our second time around with this. And some of the groups of plants that were especially badly hit were the aloes and aeoniums. And Ruth, for a little while, was so discouraged, she thought maybe we're relying too much on these things that have limited cold tolerance. But then after she thought about it, she thought, well, you know what? I love these plants. They do well here almost all the time. Just because there's an occasional freeze that knocks them back, that's not going to stop me. So she went right ahead and planted them again. And here is a little journey through the year at the garden. So here's January with the oak tree, the valley oak, with its twisted branches looming over Agave franciscini, one of the large agaves. And in February, aloes in bloom. A lot of aloes bloom in January, February. That's Aloe mutinensis with the yellow-orange flowers in the foreground. And also in the wintertime, a lot of the plants in the Crassulaceae color up beautifully. So these are Graptopetalums and sedums with their red and pink tinges that they take on, especially in the winter. And here we are in March, and that is Drosanthemum speciosum, an ice plant with that brilliant red color on the left, and Euphorbia tetragona in bloom on the right. And you can see the gazebo in the background. This is Acacia cavan, a Chilean species of acacia with golden flowers in bloom in April. And this tree is not terribly long-lived, and actually it's no longer with us. Eventually it declined and died, and we actually had the wood made into bowls because it was a beautiful wood, but it's no longer in the garden. So some trees don't live all that long, and you have to reimagine the space when they go. And here is a picture in May, and that's Acacia pendula, again with the weeping foliage at the top, Lampranthus with the magenta in the middle, and Eschscholzia californica, the California poppy, at the bottom. And there is a Australian grass tree, a Xanthorrhea, in the middle there. Here is another picture from May, and that's Yucca rigida, beautiful yucca. And this is an example of a plant that Ruth would have been mortified if somebody had come along and cut all those dead leaves off. She thought that that grass skirt look that the dead leaves provided was part of the character of the plant, and she insisted they be left on. And I think it does make a wonderful effect. And here we have a picture from June with Agave perii in flower. And you can see how tall that stalk is. Many agave flowers are really imposing. And you can see the upper part of the inflorescence where the flowers are still at the bud stage, they're red, and then at the bottom, they turn yellow as they open. This is a picture from July, and that's Erythrina bidwillii with the red flowers at the bottom, and Dazzlerium longissimum with that rust-colored inflorescence coming up behind it, and the California fan palms on the left. And here in August, Xanthorrhea quadrangulata coming into flower, one of the Australian grass trees. Our other ones bloom in the spring, but this one is consistently at the end of the summer or early fall. And that's a close-up showing its little tiny white flowers, and also the green matrix from which the flowers emerge. Looks almost like astroturf. In September, Brunsvigia josephinae, a huge bulb from South Africa. The bulb is as big as a football, an American football, maybe as big as a soccer ball too. And so this is a plant that grows in the wintertime, then goes dormant in the spring and sits there as just as a bare bulb all summer long. And then at the end of the summer, out come these amazing panicles of flowers. Another fall bloomer is Trithrinax campestris, an Argentine palm tree. And the flowers are very fragrant and very attractive to bees, usually blooms in October. A late blooming Senna bicapsularis with those brilliant yellow flowers. And at its base, Thunbergia gregori, which has orange flowers and makes a big display in the fall. In December, an Echeveria hybrid. A lot of the Echeveria gibiflora hybrids bloom in the fall and winter, like this one does. And then the pink color at the edge of the leaves is intensified in the winter as well. And for December, here we have Echinopsis terragensis, dressed up as our snowman. And this was in December 2001. And that brings me to the end of our slides. And anybody has things they want to ask, I'm more than happy to try and answer them.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was incredible. I appreciate it. The resilience of Ruth to just keep going through so many different struggles was just, it's amazing to learn about. So thank you for sharing the history.
She was definitely not a quitter.
No, it's amazing. We do have a question that came in. Jill Patterson is wondering, is the garden open to the public now?
Oh yes, the garden is open every day of the week except Monday. And so it's open until from 10 to 4 on most days, but until 5 on the weekends. And we do have a website. So that's www.ruthbancroftgarden.org. And there's lots of information on there about events that take place at the garden, about the hours of the garden, about volunteer opportunities, about joining the garden. And every month I write a plant highlight about some plant in the garden. And so there are many, many of those over the years that have accumulated. So there's lots of things to check out on our website.
Thank you, Brian. We have another question that came in, and that was, did Ruth or the people who came after her, did they always plan on this eventually becoming a public garden?
No, Ruth planted the garden for her own pleasure. And she had 3 kids, but none of them was really an avid gardener like she was. And she did not know at all what would happen to her garden after she was gone. And it was a visit from Frank Cabot of the Garden Conservancy, actually before the Garden Conservancy even existed, in about 1990 that got her thinking about all of this. And Frank said, well, in Europe, they have the National Trust that takes over important gardens and preserves them so the public can visit them. We don't have an organization like that in this country. And too often, an outstanding garden that's a deep reflection of one person's passion just, falls apart after they're gone and not there to maintain it anymore. And he said there ought to be an organization that preserves gardens like that. So he founded it, the Garden Conservancy, and we were the very first project of the Garden Conservancy. So they helped us set up a nonprofit, a conservation easement, board of directors, and got the ball rolling. So now we are a nonprofit, self-sustaining garden.
That's right. I forgot about that, Brian, but there's actually several of our public gardens that are members of the American Public Gardens Association that have benefited from the role model that Ruth Bancroft Gardens really set for that. So hats off to y'all for accomplishing what y'all have over the years.
Yeah, the Garden Conservancy has been active with preserving the gardens on Alcatraz, lots of interesting projects around here.
So there is another question that has come in. Do you sell plants to visitors?
Yes, we have a nursery, and we certainly do. So some of those plants are propagations from things in the garden, and some of them are brought in from elsewhere. You know how it is with a garden, it's feast and famine. You divide up that clump and you have all of a sudden a whole bunch of plant X, and then it's a long time until you have it again. And so we need to round out what we have available from our own propagations with things we buy in, so we keep a good mix on hand at any given time.
Excellent. I did notice that Alice was sweet and put the links to both a book about Ruth Bancroft Garden, as well as, Brian, your monthly highlights into the chat. So for those of you listening who would be interested, be sure and check out the chat for those references. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to get those in.
Yeah, note that we do have social media postings we do. And so I post on Tumblr. And if you go to our website and scroll down at the bottom, there's social media tabs, and there's a T, lowercase t for Tumblr. And then you can just go back through the years seeing hundreds of pictures of plants at the garden on the Tumblr. And there's other people who post on Instagram. So there's lots of pictures out there to see too.
And Brian, you and Alice must be on the same wavelength, because she popped that link to your Tumblr in right about the same time you started talking about it. So I'll for sure be having to go check that out. I'm sure other attendees are eager to go check it out.
I tend to post on Tumblr about every 2 weeks. So things that have come into bloom in that 2 weeks. I don't post old pictures. They're always pictures of things going on at the time when I post them.
Perfect. Well, I think that might just about do it. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us tonight and for sharing the beautiful grounds of Ruth Bancroft with us and the history. We appreciate it. And thank you to all of our attendees who made it out tonight and were able to join us as well. We encourage you to continue the tours tomorrow. We'll be back here at 6 p.m. Eastern time. And tomorrow our lineup includes Polly Hill Arboretum, Haverford College Arboretum. They are the oldest planned college landscape in America, which is really exciting and very interesting. And then we'll also be visiting the Fort Worth Botanic Garden and the Botanic Research Institute of Texas. So hope to see you all back here. As mentioned before, this is recorded and will be available online sometime tomorrow. And be sure and go back and see some of the recordings of our previous tours as well if you're interested. So thank you all. Have a great night.
Bye-bye, everybody.